It was supposed to be a simple 3-day business trip, the kind that ends with airport hugs and small souvenirs, but Adaobi Okafor came home only hours after landing in Abuja, and by the time she pushed open her front door in Lekki at exactly 2:07 p.m., her life had already begun to split into a before and an after. If you're new to this channel, just subscribe now, and say it in the comment section. The flight from Abuja had been smooth, almost annoyingly calm. Adaobi had stared out of the airplane window, watching the clouds stretch endlessly like folded cotton, her reflection faintly staring back at her. She had felt it then, that strange tightening in her chest. She told herself it was exhaustion. Or maybe guilt for leaving her 2-year-old son, Chisholm, for the first time in months. Yet something had refused to settle. At Nnamdi Azikiwe Airport, she had checked her handbag for the 3rd time before realizing the document she needed for the board presentation wasn't there. The original contract. The one with her signature and the investor's seals. She distinctly remembered placing it on her bedroom dresser before leaving for the airport 2 nights ago. "I'll just go back home and send it by courier," she had murmured to herself, already booking the next flight to Lagos. Now, standing inside her quiet house, heels clicking softly against the marble floor, Adaobi frowned. The silence felt wrong. Their home was never silent. Even if the generator wasn't running, the television was usually humming with a Nollywood movie, or the house help moving about, or Tunde on a business call in his booming voice. Today, there was nothing. She set her suitcase down gently. "Auntie Kayoma," she called, her voice light. No response. "Tunde," she tried again. Still nothing. Her eyes drifted to the staircase. The air felt thick. Even the curtains seemed frozen in place. She began walking toward the kitchen first. Empty. The sink was dry. No cooking aroma. She checked the backyard through the glass doors. No one. Then she heard it. Soft laughter. Feminine. It floated faintly through the hallway, barely audible, like a secret the walls were trying to hide. Adaobi's body stilled instantly. Her pulse thudded in her ears. The laughter came again, followed by a low murmur, Tunde's voice. Her bedroom. Each step down the corridor felt heavier than the last. Her heels suddenly sounded too loud, so she slipped them off and continued barefoot. The marble felt cold under her feet. She paused at the bedroom door, her fingers hovering above the handle. She told herself there would be an explanation. A harmless one. She turned the knob slowly. The door opened just enough. White sheets. Tangled. Bare skin. Tunde's back. And beneath him, unmistakably, Kayoma. The new maid she had hired barely 3 weeks ago. Time did not shatter. It did not explode. It simply slowed. Adaobi's eyes absorbed every detail with terrifying clarity, the mole on Tunde's shoulder, the gold bracelet on Kayoma's wrist, the faint perfume in the air. Tunde froze first. His head snapped toward the door, eyes wide, face draining of color. "Ada!" Kayoma gasped, scrambling for the sheet. Adaobi did not scream. She did not cry. She did not tremble. Instead, she smiled. It wasn't a wide smile. It wasn't even dramatic. It was small. Controlled. Almost polite. "Oh," she said softly. "I forgot something." Her calmness confused them more than any outburst could have. She stepped fully into the room, walked to her dresser as if she hadn't just witnessed betrayal in its rawest form, picked up the brown envelope containing her contract, and glanced at her reflection in the mirror. Her makeup was still flawless. Her expression unreadable. Behind her, Tunde struggled to speak. "Ada, this is not what it looks like." She met his eyes in the mirror. "It looks like exactly what it is." Kayoma clutched the sheet tightly around herself, unable to form words. Adaobi turned, finally facing them directly. Her gaze lingered on Tunde for a second longer than necessary. 10 years of marriage stood between them in that silence. 10 years of shared dreams, joint investments, late-night conversations, and whispered promises. "Finish up," she said evenly. "Then come downstairs." She walked out and closed the door gently behind her. Downstairs, Adaobi sat in the living room as though waiting for guests. She crossed her legs elegantly, picked up her phone, and scrolled through her emails. Her breathing was steady now. Controlled. Measured. Footsteps thundered down the stairs minutes later. Tunde appeared first, dressed hastily in jeans and a wrinkled shirt. His hair was disheveled, sweat glistening along his forehead. "Ada, please," he began immediately. It was a mistake. She didn't look up. A mistake usually happens once. It didn't mean anything. That's usually worse. He ran his hands through his hair. "I was lonely." "You've been traveling more." "The business, our business," she corrected calmly. Kayama hovered awkwardly at the staircase, fully dressed now, eyes lowered. Adaobi finally lifted her gaze and looked at the young woman. "Kayama, go pack your things." "Auntie, I..." Immediately. There was no anger in her tone. Just authority. Kayama hurried away. Tunde stepped closer. "You can't just throw her out like that." Adaobi tilted her head slightly. "Would you prefer I keep her?" He fell silent. The air between them shifted. Tunde expected tears. Shouting. Accusations. Instead, he faced a version of his wife he did not recognize, still, composed, almost luminous. "You embarrass me," he said weakly, as though grasping for something to regain control. Adaobi's eyebrow lifted. "Did I? I'm saying we can fix this. Nobody has to know." She let out a soft, almost amused breath. "Nobody." Kayama reappeared with a small suitcase. Adaobi stood up gracefully. "I will transfer your final salary," she told Kayama. "You may leave the keys on the console." Kayama nodded silently and walked out. The front door shut with a quiet click. Tunde exhaled heavily. "Ada, please. Let's talk about this like adults." She picked up her suitcase. "We will." Relief flickered briefly across his face. "But not now." She walked toward the staircase, then paused midway and looked back at him. "Tomorrow evening," she said calmly, "we're hosting a family dinner." Tunde frowned. "Why?" Adaobi's eyes held his steadily. "Because I believe in transparency." His stomach tightened. She continued upstairs without another word, leaving him alone in the living room, surrounded by silence that now felt suffocating. Inside her bedroom, Adaobi placed the contract neatly inside her handbag. She sat on the edge of the bed, the same bed, and allowed herself exactly 5 seconds to feel the sting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then she stood up, walked to the mirror, and adjusted her blouse. Her reflection stared back, strong and unbroken. "Let's begin," she whispered to herself. The house did not feel like hers that night. Every wall seemed to echo with memories she had not invited back. Adaobi moved through the rooms with measured precision, as though she were already redesigning the space in her mind, repositioning furniture, rewriting history. Tunde remained downstairs for a long time after she went up, pacing, muttering into his phone, trying to reach someone who could help him think his way out of what had happened. But there are some mistakes no strategy can soften. By 7 p.m., Adaobi descended the stairs dressed in a simple navy dress, hair neatly tied back. She looked like a woman preparing for a board meeting, not a wife who had walked in on betrayal hours earlier. Tunde was seated on the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "We need to talk," he said immediately. She sat opposite him. "We are talking." He swallowed. "Cancel the dinner." "No." "Ada, please. You're acting like this is some kind of public trial." She folded her hands. Is it not? It was just a mistake. You've said that. He stood abruptly. What do you want from me? To beg? I'm begging. I'm sorry. I was stupid. Adaobi watched him carefully. His voice carried desperation, but not necessarily remorse. There was fear in his eyes, not fear of losing her, but fear of exposure. How long? She asked calmly. He hesitated. That hesitation told her more than any confession. It wasn't serious, he muttered. How long? 2 months. She nodded slowly, absorbing it like a business update. And before her? His silence again. Adaobi leaned back. Tunde, I am not interested in the emotional version of this story. I am interested in the factual one. He dropped back into his seat. You've changed, he whispered. No, she replied. I've evolved. The clock ticked loudly in the background. He tried a softer approach. Think about Chisholm. What will happen to him if this explodes? She met his gaze. I have thought about my son more than you ever have. That's unfair. Is it? Her calmness unsettled him. He was used to passionate debates, fiery disagreements, even dramatic reconciliations. But this? This was surgical. I'm not cancelling the dinner, she said again. Both families will be here by 6 tomorrow. My parents will be disappointed. Disappointment is a luxury. He shook his head. You're going to destroy everything we built. Adaobi stood up slowly. No. You did that at 2:07 p.m. The next morning, Adaobi woke early. She prepared Chisholm's breakfast herself, humming softly as though nothing had changed. The little boy giggled in his high chair, unaware that the foundation of his home had cracked. Tunde watched her from the doorway. You're acting normal, he said. She wiped Chisholm's mouth gently. I am normal. Ada. She carried their son to the living room and sat with him on the rug, stacking colourful blocks. Daddy looks sad, Chisholm said in his tiny voice. Adaobi smiled. Daddy will be fine. Tunde felt a sting in his chest. For a brief moment, guilt tried to surface. But pride suffocated it quickly. By afternoon, preparations for dinner had begun. Adaobi called the caterer personally, selecting dishes with precision: jollof rice, peppered turkey, egusi soup, pounded yam, grilled fish. She instructed the decorator to keep everything simple and elegant. Tunde stood beside her while she gave instructions over the phone. You're really doing this, he murmured. Yes. You're enjoying this. She ended the call and looked at him. Enjoyment has nothing to do with it. What then? Order? He frowned. Order? When chaos enters a house, someone must restore order. And you think embarrassing me restores order? She tilted her head slightly. Embarrassment is a byproduct, not the goal. He studied her face, searching for cracks. There were none. Why are you so calm? He asked quietly. Adaobi paused for a moment before answering. Because I am not reacting. I am responding. He didn't fully understand the difference, but he felt the weight of it. By evening, the house looked ready for celebration. Candles lined the dining table. Soft instrumental music played in the background. If anyone walked in unaware, they would assume it was a birthday or anniversary. At 5:45 p.m., Adaobi changed into a cream-colored dress. She wore minimal jewelry and subtle makeup. She looked radiant. Tunde felt smaller standing beside her. You don't have to do this, he tried one last time. She adjusted her earrings. It's already done. The doorbell rang at exactly 6:02 p.m. Tunde's parents arrived first. His mother embraced Adaobi warmly. My daughter, you look beautiful. "Thank you, Mama," Adaobi replied with genuine politeness. His father shook Tunde's hand firmly. "Everything okay?" Of course, Tunde forced a smile. Minutes later, Adaobi's parents arrived. Her father's presence alone commanded respect. He surveyed the room with quiet observation. "This must be important," he said to his daughter. "It is," she replied softly. Emeka, Tunde's older brother, walked in last, adjusting his glasses. "I almost didn't come," he joked lightly. "Traffic nearly finished me." Everyone laughed politely. But beneath the surface, tension brewed. They gathered in the living room first, exchanging small talk. Adaobi moved gracefully between them, offering drinks, ensuring comfort. Tunde's palms were damp. His mother noticed his unease. "You look tired," she whispered. "Work stress," he replied quickly. Dinner was announced at 7:10 p.m. Everyone took their seats around the long table. Plates clinked softly. The aroma of food filled the air. Adaobi remained standing at the head of the table. "I want to say something before we eat," she began gently. The room quieted instantly. Tunde's heart began pounding. Adaobi's gaze moved from face to face, her parents, his parents, Emeka. She held her glass of juice lightly, her posture poised. "I called this dinner because family matters should be handled by family," she said. Her father nodded slowly. Tunde shifted in his chair. Adaobi turned briefly toward him, then back to the others. "For 10 years, I have been proud to be a member of the Okafor family. I have supported my husband, respected our parents, and built a life I believed was founded on loyalty." The word lingered in the air. Tunde felt sweat forming again along his hairline. His mother looked confused. "Adaobi, what is this about?" Adaobi offered a small smile. "Clarity." She placed her glass down gently on the table. Tunde's breathing grew shallow. The calm before the storm had never felt so heavy. And Adaobi remained perfectly still, in complete control of what was about to unfold. The dining room felt smaller than it had an hour earlier. The chandelier above cast a soft golden light that now seemed too bright, too revealing. Plates of untouched food sat between them, steam fading slowly into the heavy air. Adaobi stood at the head of the table, her posture relaxed, her expression composed. Tunde avoided her eyes. "I asked everyone here tonight," she continued evenly, "because secrets grow in silence. And silence has lived in my home for too long." Her mother shifted slightly in her seat. "Adaobi, what is going on?" Tunde forced a laugh. "Baby, maybe this isn't the time." She raised one hand gently without looking at him. "It is exactly the time." His father's jaw tightened. "Speak clearly, my daughter." Adaobi nodded respectfully. "Yesterday afternoon, I returned home earlier than expected." Tunde's stomach dropped. "I walked into my bedroom," she said calmly, "and found my husband in bed with our housemaid." The words did not explode. They landed quietly. But the effect was seismic. His mother gasped sharply, hand flying to her chest. "Tunde?" His father's eyes darkened. "Is this true?" Tunde's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Emeka leaned back slowly, studying his younger brother. "Answer her." "It was a mistake," Tunde blurted out. "It didn't mean anything." Adaobi turned her gaze to him. 2 months, you said." The room fell silent again. His mother stared at him in disbelief. 2 months. He rubbed his forehead. "Mama, please." Adaobi's father spoke, his voice low and steady. "You brought shame into your house." "I said I was sorry," Tunde snapped, his composure cracking. "Why are we acting like I committed murder?" Adaobi's eyes remained calm. "Because betrayal kills slowly." Her mother inhaled sharply. Tunde pushed his chair back slightly. Why are you doing this publicly? We could have handled this privately. Adaobi faced him fully now. You handled it privately. I am handling it transparently. Emeka exhaled slowly. You always thought you were too smart, he muttered toward Tunde. Tunde shot him a glare. Stay out of this. I will not, Emeka replied firmly. Because this affects the family name. Adaobi lifted her glass again but did not drink. I am not done. Every head turned toward her. You see, she continued, yesterday was not the beginning of my awareness. It was simply the confirmation. Tunde stiffened. What do you mean? She held his gaze steadily. I have known for months that something was wrong. His face paled. His mother looked between them anxiously. Adaobi, what are you saying? Adaobi inhaled slowly before speaking again. About 6 months ago, I noticed unusual withdrawals from our joint account. Small amounts. Consistent. When I asked, I was told they were business expenses. Tunde swallowed. I also noticed frequent late-night calls, she continued. And unexplained trips. You're spying on me, he demanded weakly. She ignored him. I did not confront him then. Instead, I began to observe. Her father nodded approvingly. I hired someone, Adaobi said. Tunde's eyes widened. You what? I hired a private investigator. A ripple of murmurs spread around the table. His mother covered her mouth. Jesus! Tunde laughed nervously. This is ridiculous. Adaobi reached into a slim folder placed neatly beside her plate and removed several printed photographs. She laid them gently on the table and slid them forward. Tunde stared down at the images. Himself. Entering a hotel. Sitting intimately with a woman at a restaurant. Laughing. Touching. The evidence was undeniable. His father's voice trembled with contained anger. You disgraced yourself. It's not like that, Tunde said quickly. It was just. Just what? Emeka cut in. Adaobi's voice remained steady. Infidelity is rarely to just anything. She paused briefly, letting the weight of it settle. But yesterday, she continued, was particularly interesting. Tunde felt cold. Because the maid you were with, Adaobi allowed the silence to stretch for 2 seconds. Was not just a maid. Confusion flickered across his mother's face. What do you mean? Adaobi placed another document on the table. Kayoma is the private investigator I hired. The room froze. Tunde's mind refused to process it. That's not possible. She applied for the job through an agency I contacted, Adaobi explained calmly. Her assignment was simple, confirm what I already suspected. His chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stood abruptly. You set me up. I gave you opportunity, she corrected. You planted temptation in my own house. You invited it into our bed. His breathing became uneven. This is manipulation. No, Adaobi replied softly. This is strategy. His mother looked devastated. Tunde, is this true? He stared at Adaobi, searching for weakness, for cruelty, for revenge in her eyes. Instead, he saw clarity. You've been planning this, he said slowly. Yes. For how long? Long enough. Emeka leaned forward. You underestimated her. Tunde ignored him. So what now? You expose me and that's it. Adaobi's expression did not change. No. She placed both hands lightly on the back of her chair. For months, while confirming your betrayal, I also protected myself. His pulse quickened. The house, she said evenly, is in my name. His father blinked. What? It was transferred last year under the tax restructuring we discussed, she explained. You signed the documents. Tunde's memory flashed back to stacks of paperwork he had skimmed without attention. Our primary business accounts, she continued, have been separated legally. My shares are secured. You can't just take everything, he shouted. I am not taking what is yours, she replied. I am keeping what is mine. His mother began to cry quietly. Adaobi looked at her gently. Mama, I have no desire to destroy your son. But I will not allow him to destroy me. Her father spoke firmly. What is your decision? Adaobi's voice remained calm and unwavering. I have filed for divorce. The word hung heavy in the air. Tunde stared at her as if she had spoken a foreign language. You wouldn't. I already did. When? Last week. Silence swallowed the room. You were still smiling at me, he whispered. Yes. His knees weakened slightly, and he sank back into his chair. You were planning my downfall, he said bitterly. No, she replied. I was planning my survival. His father stood slowly. You have shamed this family. Tunde's voice cracked. So that's it? 10 years gone. Adaobi met his gaze steadily. You ended it long before yesterday. Her mother reached for her hand. My daughter, what about the child? Adaobi softened slightly. Chisholm will have both parents. But he will not grow up in a house built on lies. Tunde's eyes filled with something close to regret, but pride held him hostage. You think you've won, he muttered. Adaobi shook her head gently. This is not about winning. She gathered the photographs and placed them back into the folder. It is about peace. The chandelier continued to glow softly above them. Outside, Lagos traffic hummed faintly in the distance, indifferent to the implosion inside the Okafor home. Adaobi finally took her seat. Please, she said calmly. Let's eat before the food gets cold. No one moved for several seconds. Then, slowly, her father reached for his fork. The reckoning had come, not with shouting, not with chaos, but with precision. No one truly tasted the food that night. Forks moved out of habit, spoons scraped against plates, but conversation dissolved into heavy silence broken only by the occasional forced remark about the meal. Tunde barely touched his plate. He sat rigid, staring at the polished surface of the dining table as though answers might appear within the wood grain. Adaobi ate slowly and neatly, her movements controlled, her appetite steady. It unsettled him more than anger ever could. After dinner, the families migrated back to the living room. The earlier warmth had evaporated completely. Tunde's mother dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. His father stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring into the darkness outside as if seeking counsel from the night. Adaobi remained standing. I believe there are a few final things that need to be clarified, she said evenly. Tunde looked up sharply. More? Yes. Her father nodded slightly. Let her finish. Adaobi walked to the console table near the wall and picked up a slim brown envelope. She returned to the center of the room. Over the past 6 months, she continued, I consulted not only a private investigator but also a lawyer. Tunde let out a short, humorless laugh. Of course you did. She ignored the interruption. The divorce papers were filed quietly to avoid unnecessary scandal. I wanted evidence before proceeding. Yesterday provided that. You recorded me, he demanded. Yes. The word was simple. Unapologetic. His jaw tightened. You invaded my privacy. She held his gaze. You violated our marriage. Emeka exhaled slowly, almost impressed. You really thought 10 steps ahead. Tunde shot him a glare but said nothing. Adaobi turned toward his parents. Mama, Papa, I have no intention of dragging your son through public disgrace. The recordings will remain private as long as he cooperates. Tunde's father spoke sternly. Cooperates with what? Adaobi opened the envelope and removed several documents, placing them on the glass center table. With the terms. Tunde's pulse quickened again. Terms? Yes, she replied calmly. The divorce settlement. His breathing grew shallow. You think you can dictate everything? I am not dictating, she said. I am outlining what is legally enforceable. She began listing them without raising her voice. The house remained solely in my name, as already registered. He clenched his fists. The business shares remain divided as legally structured last year. You retain your portion, I retain mine. His father looked surprised. You restructured without informing us. Adaobi answered respectfully. It was done under professional advice. It protected both of us. Tunde scoffed. Protected you? Yes. She continued. Joint savings accounts have been frozen pending final division, but the majority of household assets were purchased under my company's accounts. He stared at her in disbelief. You've been planning my exit like a project. She met his eyes steadily. I have been planning stability. His mother spoke weakly. What about forgiveness? Adaobi turned to her gently. Forgiveness and consequence are not enemies. The room fell quiet again. Tunde stood abruptly. You set me up. You planted that woman in this house knowing what would happen. Adaobi's voice remained calm. I suspected what would happen. You created temptation. I provided opportunity, she replied. Character did the rest. He paced the room now, frustration radiating from him. You wanted me to fail. I wanted the truth. And if I had resisted, he challenged. She looked at him steadily. Then we would not be here. Silence. The weight of that possibility hung heavily between them. Emeka crossed his arms. You underestimated her discipline. Tunde glared at him. Stop acting like you're impressed. I am not impressed, Emeka replied evenly. I am disappointed in you. Tunde turned back to Adaobi. So that's it? I sign and walk away. There is one more thing, she said. His stomach tightened again. Custody. His mother inhaled sharply. Adaobi continued, her tone unwavering. Chisholm will live primarily with me. You will have visitation rights, structured and supervised initially. Supervised, he snapped. You think I'm a danger to my own child? I think instability is. He shook his head. You're punishing me. No, she corrected softly. I am protecting him. Her father finally spoke again. This is what wisdom looks like. Tunde felt the walls closing in. You've turned everyone against me. No, Adaobi replied quietly. Your actions did. He stopped pacing and stared at her. Did you ever love me? The question surprised even him. Adaobi paused for the first time that evening. Yes, she said truthfully. I did. And now? She did not hesitate. Now I respect myself more. The answer struck deeper than anger ever could. His shoulders slumped slightly. You planned everything, he murmured. Yes. And you smiled at me while doing it. Yes. Why? Because emotional reactions cloud judgment. He stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. You're cold, he said quietly. No, she replied. I am clear. His father stepped forward. Tunde, you will sign. You made your bed. His mother wept softly. My son. Tunde felt humiliation crawl up his spine. Not because of shouting. Not because of scandal. But because he realized he had completely miscalculated the woman he married. You were always quiet, he said to Adaobi. I thought that meant gentle. It meant observant. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Adaobi placed a pen beside the documents. "You may review them with your lawyer tomorrow," she said calmly. "But the outcome will not change." He looked at the papers but did not touch them. 3 months, she added evenly. "That is how long you have to vacate this house." His head snapped up. "You're throwing me out." "I am asking you to relocate." He let out a hollow laugh. "Where am I supposed to go?" "That," she replied gently, "is no longer my responsibility." The finality in her tone left no room for negotiation. Tunde's father walked toward him. "You will stay with your cousin for now." Humiliation burned in his chest. Adaobi gathered the remaining documents neatly. "This matter ends here," she said calmly. "There will be no shouting, no public scandal, no police. Only lawful separation." Tunde sank back into his seat, defeated not by chaos but by precision. The hunter had indeed become the hunted. And for the first time since 2:07 p.m., he understood that the smile she wore that afternoon had not been weakness. It had been calculation. 3 months later, the Okafor house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like ownership. The silence that once pressed heavily against the walls had transformed into peace. The air was lighter. The furniture had been rearranged. The master bedroom was no longer their room. It was hers. Fresh curtains hung by the windows. The sheets were new. The past had been folded away and boxed like old clothes that no longer fit. Adaobi stood on the balcony one Saturday morning, watching the early Lagos sun stretch across the rooftops. Chisholm's laughter floated up from the living room where he was building towers with his blocks. The sound anchored her. Reminded her of what mattered. Her phone buzzed softly in her hand. "Message from Tunde, I'm coming by at 2 p.m. for visitation." She read it without emotion. "Okay," she replied. That was the rhythm now. Structured. Predictable. Controlled. Tunde had moved in with his cousin in Surulere, just as his father instructed. The first few weeks had been the hardest for him. Pride does not adjust easily to shared rooms and borrowed cars. Friends who once called him daily had suddenly become busy. Business partners kept their distance, whispering quietly about instability. Word had not spread widely, but in Lagos, silence still travels. Adaobi did not engage in gossip. She had kept her promise. No recordings were leaked. No social media posts. No public disgrace. She handled everything legally and quietly. And that silence spoke louder than any scandal. At 1:58 p.m., the gate buzzed. Chisholm ran toward the door. "Daddy!" Adaobi opened it calmly. Tunde stood there holding a small toy car, dressed more simply than he used to. No expensive watch. No bold cologne. Just a man learning humility the hard way. "Hi," he said softly. "Come in." Their interactions had become brief and formal. He knelt down to hug his son, and for a moment, something sincere flickered across his face. Fatherhood had not disappeared. It had simply been overshadowed before. They moved into the living room. Tunde sat on the floor with Chisholm, rolling the toy car back and forth. Adaobi remained nearby, reading a document but observing quietly. After 20 minutes, Tunde looked up at her. "You look different." She didn't look away from her paper. "Different how?" "Peaceful." "I am." He hesitated. "I didn't think you'd move on this fast." She finally met his eyes. Moving on and moving forward are not the same thing. He absorbed that. "I've been seeing a therapist," he said suddenly. She raised an eyebrow slightly. "That's good." "I didn't realize how much I tied my ego to attention." Adaobi said nothing. "I kept thinking you were too focused on business. Too independent. I felt small." She closed the document slowly. "And cheating made you feel big." He winced at the bluntness. No, he admitted quietly. It made me feel powerful. Temporarily. She nodded once. Power without discipline destroys. He studied her carefully. Do you hate me? She thought about it for a brief second. No, she answered honestly. Why not? Because hatred ties you to the person who hurt you. He exhaled slowly. I deserved worse. That is not my burden to carry. Chisholm tugged at his father's arm, demanding attention again. Tunde returned to playing, but his mind clearly remained elsewhere. When the visitation time ended, he stood reluctantly. Thank you, he said. For what? For not destroying me publicly. Adaobi held his gaze. I did not marry you to destroy you. He nodded slowly. I underestimated you. Yes. There was no pride in her tone. Just fact. As he walked toward the door, he paused. Can I ask you something? You just did. He almost smiled. Why did you forgive me publicly at the family meeting? Her expression softened slightly. Because forgiveness frees me, she said. Not you. He waited for more. I refused to let anger become my identity, she continued. You made a mistake. A destructive one. But I will not let it define my character. He swallowed. Does that mean there's hope? He asked quietly. For reconciliation, she clarified. He nodded. Adaobi's answer came steady and firm. No. The word did not carry cruelty. It carried closure. I can forgive you, she said, and still choose not to return. He looked down, absorbing the finality. You've changed, he murmured. I've refined. He stepped outside, then turned back one last time. You were right about one thing. She waited. When a woman is quiet, he gave a small, humbled smile. It doesn't mean she's weak. Adaobi allowed herself the faintest smile in return. It means she's thinking. He nodded and walked toward the gate. The house grew quiet again, but not heavy. Adaobi closed the door gently and leaned against it for a brief moment. Not in exhaustion. In reflection. 3 months earlier, she had stood in this same house, contract in hand, staring at betrayal without flinching. Many expected her to break. To shout. To beg. To collapse under humiliation. Instead, she had calculated. She had protected her assets. Secured her child's stability. Preserved her dignity. And walked away with her head high. She moved back to the balcony, watching the sun dip lower in the sky. Her phone buzzed again. Message from her lawyer, final decree has been approved. She typed back, thank you. It was official now. She wasn't Mrs. Okafor anymore. She was simply Adaobi. And that was enough. Inside, Chisholm called out, Mummy. She turned immediately and walked toward him, her steps light, her mind clear. There are women who scream when betrayed. There are women who break. And there are women who calculate. Adaobi chose calculation. Not for revenge. Not for applause. But for peace. And in that peace, she found something stronger than marriage, stronger than pride, stronger than scandal. She found herself.